You're listening to Learning is the New Working, a podcast by the Learning Futures Group about the future of workplace learning and the people helping define it. This episode is part of our Season 7 called Is Purpose Working? It's a collaboration with Danny Johnson and Stacia Garr of Red Thread Research, in which we talk about purpose-driven organizations and the impact of purpose on all aspects of talent management. In this episode, Danny Johnson and I interview Celia Beringer. She's the Chief Learning Officer at Sanofi. Sanofi is a global life sciences company committed to improving access to healthcare, the healthcare of communities, and to finding new solutions for patients by combining breakthrough science with advanced technology. We're very grateful for the team at NovoEd for their sponsorship of this season. Global enterprises rely on NovoEd's collaborative online learning platform to build high-value capabilities that result in real impact. With NovoEd, you deliver powerful, engaging learning that activates deep skill development and drives measurable business outcomes. NovoEd will host a live webinar later in the season where Danny, Stacia and I will reflect on what we've learned, the implications for you as learning and talent teams, and take your questions and comments live. To reserve your seat, to get your questions in, and find other bonus materials, please register now at www.novoed.com/purpose.
Was it perfect and polished and beautiful? Probably not, but it was authentic and it was real and it acknowledged what was going on. And I think it kind of made it more human. I think that that's created an opportunity for us to say what really matters and what do we really want to focus on.
In March of 2020, Sanofi simultaneously went to work on the critical effort to help develop and manufacture an effective COVID-19 vaccine, while at the same time flipping a 110,000-strong workforce to the new realities of operating in a global pandemic. At the same time, Celia and a team had to weigh the decision as to whether to continue with a planned worldwide launch of the brand new Sanofi University. This was a journey that involved a new CEO, a deep reflection on Sanofi's purpose and its business results, and perhaps some rethinking of what is the purpose of a corporate university in a time of great crisis. Sometime after recording this interview, Danny and I sat down with Stacia to reflect on the conversation. You'll hear some of that discussion before we go into our interview with Celia Beringer of Sanofi University.
What I loved about it was how thoughtful and really just honest Celia was about the journey that they're on with regard to purpose. That purpose is infused within their organization, that people really believe in it. She talked about the pictures of colleagues in the manufacturing sites during COVID. I think that she was really thoughtful in kind of sharing that, but then saying, hey, we, when I first came here, this was not a big thing. And it's increasingly a big part of how we're thinking about the learning and the resources that we're offering. But we are on this journey. It's here, but we're on this journey and bringing it into our processes and practices.
Definitely on a change journey. And she talked about there's a new CEO there. And she also talks a little bit about how his observation was this strong sense of purpose that he picks up in the culture as he comes in and starts to go around and meet everybody doesn't seem to be kind of resulting in the right kind of performance outcomes of the business. And so the journey is, how do we connect those things more effectively?
We've talked a bit about this dynamic of top-down versus bottom-up. And so it sounds to me like there was very much so a bottom-up focus on purpose, and that it was clearly pervaded the culture, but there wasn't kind of necessarily the leadership at the top to give it an embodiment, a language, a vision, and a structure. And so this new CEO has kind of enabled that, and then that's hyperpowering the rest of their efforts to reinforce and to bring it to life. If you contrast Sanofi with, one of the other organizations we talked about, Medtronic, you can kind of see a little bit of that distinction, whereas Medtronic also had it baked in everywhere, but also from the leadership at the top, and that's been consistent. So you kind of feel like in some ways maybe Sanofi is just a little bit farther behind on the journey, not necessarily less purpose-driven, but farther behind on the journey and getting it integrated. It'll be interesting if we could talk to Celia in a few years to hear where they end up.
The other story that really popped from this conversation was bringing to market a brand new corporate university slap bang in the middle of the first wave of COVID this year. And I thought it was great. Celia talked about how it forced them to be more authentic, more real, and more human versus being very polished, which might have been the culture beforehand. And I thought that was really interesting.
I also think it was interesting that she pointed to purpose as a way to make decisions about what they were going to do. So she very clearly says there are these things that we want to do, but there are also these things that we need to do and these things that we really do well. How do we sort of sort through this long laundry list of things to focus on the right things to get us to our purpose?
Yeah, once again, clarity in decision making. She definitely talked about that aspect as well.
I also like the way that she talked about it as sort of a unifying force, and those are my words, not hers, but working with the rest of the organization to solve much bigger problems instead of trying to handle it just with learning or just with, messaging or some of the other things that we've seen in other organizations.
Also a good thread here on skills and talent mobility. Again, a foreshadowing of our next season, Danny, as helping people really connect to developing skills that make sense for them and their own purpose.
I actually think that's a really interesting topic. And as we've started to do some of the research in mobility and skills, how much sort of purpose plays a role. A lot of leaders are terming it as values instead of maybe purpose, but they do it not because it's necessarily, there is a financial aspect to it, but most of them are doing it to provide a better experience or to ensure that their people are okay if they radically change directions.
So my name is Celia Berenguer. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Sanofi, and today is the 25th of September, 2020.
Celia, thanks so much for joining us on Learning is the New Working, Friday night, your time. We really appreciate that. And as you know, I'm joined by Danny because we have this amazing joint project going on to do a whole series of conversations with people around the topic of purpose-driven organizations and the implications of that for talent management. So welcome.
Great to be here. Happy to take part.
We're going to start with some quick questions just to sort of sketch out what you do for people. And then Danny's going to pick up there and we're going to dive into a couple of sort of deeper topics. So first question, what part of the world do you live and work in? That might be complicated, and why?
So that is a complicated question for me. So I live in the UK and I've been here for the past 10 years. But I work in France. Sanofi, the company I work for, is based in Paris, and I travel between the UK and France on a regular basis, except for obviously under current circumstances, it's been a different pattern. I guess I grew up kind of between cultures and between countries, so it feels quite natural, actually, to be in a global organization like Sanofi and, sort of spending my time across multiple cultures, countries, etc. So I love it. I love where I work and I love where I live.
This is an aside. I cannot nail down your accent for probably obvious reasons. Celia, where did you develop your accent?
I was born in France. I grew up primarily in Spain, and I did spend a lot of my time growing up in France and in the US. So my English is heavily influenced. I would say probably I spent a lot of time a lot of summers in the northeast of the United States, but I've also spent time kind of in other parts of the US. But I don't know. I guess that means that between my US time and being now 10 years in the UK, I probably have a bit of a bizarre mix of accents.
I can hear all those threads in there, which is great. So could you tell us what your job title is and how would you describe the work that you generally do?
So I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Sanofi. And I guess what I do is try to help people grow and evolve in the way that's right for them. And for Sanofi, of course, because as Chief Learning Officer, it's about kind of meeting our people's needs to develop and meeting the organization's needs to develop. So it is about learning and development in the organization, but it's with a big spotlight on, how are we identifying what we need for our people and for the organization.
Sanofi is a pretty well-known brand name, and we're all experts on the biopharma healthcare industry now anyway. But could you just describe the business model of Sanofi and the kind of work that it does?
So we are a global healthcare leader, of course. We have over 100,000 employees, actually representing more than 140 nationalities across the globe. So we're a pretty diverse organization. We have 73 manufacturing sites in 32 countries. So we have, quite a broad presence across the world and across our products. Our products cut across 4 major businesses: our general medicines business, our specialty care, our consumer healthcare, and of course, the one that everybody's looking at the moment, which is vaccines. And then we have obviously a big manufacturing and a big R&D function with 4 major R&D hubs around the world. So we really kind of cut straight through the value chain of the healthcare industry.
And I assume that creates a really diverse set of skill sets of people who work for you. Can you just talk a little bit about the talent landscape and perhaps what's going on demographically?
It's really interesting, actually, to see how our talent landscape workforce across the world is evolving. And what's interesting about it is that you're definitely seeing different pace of change and types of change depending on where you're looking around the world. So if I take, for instance, our European workforce, you have a lot of people who have been with the company for years and years and years, a demographic that's more sort of traditional, possibly leaning towards an older generation. And if I compare that to Asia, and in particular China, there's a much higher turnover rate somewhere like China. And obviously the demographics are very different as well. So it is quite diverse from one part of the world to another. There's a big factor at the moment, with the changing landscape. How is our talent needing to evolve? And what is it that we need to kind of move towards? So we talk a lot about, other organizations, upskilling, reskilling our people. The organization is changing in so many ways for external reasons, external factors and internal factors. So it's kind of like, how is our talent moving at the pace of all of that? I guess what's really clear is that as we think about how our talent evolves and develops, if there ever was a rule book, COVID has definitely fully thrown it out. So it's just accentuated how we really need to think differently about what experience people need to be exposed to and how that experience contributes to things like agility and inclusion and perspectives that, were just not part of the reality. So we're now looking more at things like, how are we getting clear on our skills taxonomy, the types of skills we need in the organization, and using that to be smarter about knowing what we have and how we want to evolve than relying on kind of traditional jobs and, and career paths in the organization.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure Danny's going to want to jump into that topic as well on time. There's a couple of interesting things there. One is having a future orientation. I'm hearing that very strongly, as well as this notion of the job to be done rather than job definitions that are fixed. That's definitely an interesting trend. Can we talk a little bit about this concept of purpose? Does Sanofi have a explicit purpose statement? And if so, do you know what that is?
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, the sort of purpose of Sanofi has been explicitly shared as empowering life. And you'll see that if you go into our website and kind of engage with the company. That's something that's pretty present still. I guess one thing to say about empowering life is that, I've been in the organization for almost 3 years now. And I guess one of the things that I've definitely picked up from my colleagues around me, the people I've gotten to know and work with and visited around the world, is that there's this common thread in the organization about real passion in the people and the patients that we serve, and,
Mm.
that we're here to make their lives better, longer, stronger. And that is a truth. That's something that I've